Some time back, a friend wanted to build a table with simple pine construction lumber from a home center, and this is what he ended up with. In this video, I'll show you how we solved the problem and helped him get from this to this. By the end, you'll also know how to pick the right boards so you can make a top for a table or any other piece of furniture that will stay flat and look great for many, many years. Like many of us, my friend just wanted to build a quality piece of furniture without spending a huge pile of cash. It was also an opportunity to get the kids involved, which is always fun. So I volunteered my shop, but I tried to stay hands-off for the most part. He picked out his own wood, mostly 4x4s for the base and 2x8s for the top, and we stickered them to dry for a few weeks before we started the build. I was skeptical that he could get a good top from the lumber he had, but he spent a day milling and gluing it all up, and sure enough, a few days later, it warped badly. I wish I had more pictures to show you, but honestly, I didn't plan on making a video about this project until I saw that this could be a teaching opportunity. So it was back to the Home Depot. This time I told him to get the widest boards he could find with the straightest grain possible. I know, that's easier said than done with construction lumber, but I told him to buy about 30% more wood than he thought he needed, with the promise that it would pay off in the end. Now, to understand what we're about to do, you have to know a little bit about how wood moves. So here's a short clip that I made on that subject back when I didn't have such a nice beard. Wood fibers are like straws. When a tree is alive, those fibers are full of water. When that tree's cut down and sawn into boards at the mill, a lot of the moisture is still inside. It leaves gradually through evaporation, and as it does, those fibers contract. But they don't contract evenly and they don't contract permanently. Even after the board is dried in a kiln, those fibers will always be trying to reach the same moisture level as the air around them. On humid days, they're going to swell up. On dry days, well, you get the point. When a board swells and shrinks, it doesn't get longer or shorter, at least not to the extent that a woodworker would even notice. It mostly moves in two directions, radially and tangentially. Take a flat sawn board, for example, which is cut from a part of a tree where the rings are nearly parallel to the surface of the board, so it looks like there's layers. As the moisture continues to leave the wood fibers, these layers will get thinner and narrower. Likewise, if the humidity in the air around the board is greater than the moisture content in those fibers, those layers will get thicker and wider. Changes across the rings are called radial movement. Changes along the rings is called tangential movement, and the two are not equal. Wood moves about twice as much tangentially as it does radially. So if you had a flat sawn board with rings nearly parallel to the surface like this one, the width would change twice as much as the thickness of the board. Simple enough, right? Not so fast. When was the last time you saw a board with rings this straight? Unless you use really narrow stock from a really big tree, it's more likely that you're using a plane sawn board where the rings become more and more perpendicular to the board's surface as they get closer to the edges. Since the angle of the rings in relation to the board's surface changes, some parts of the board are getting thicker or thinner at a faster rate than other parts, which are getting wider and narrower. This leads to cupping, which is why flat sawn boards like this are so unstable, and woodworkers prefer quarter sawn boards instead. Quarter sawn boards are oriented so the rings are perpendicular to the faces. This consistent even grain doesn't just look nice. It's also more predictable because the tangential and radial movement is always even across the board. And the tangential movement, which is what affects the wood the most, is minimal because each ring segment is very narrow. Unfortunately, we can't all use quarter sawn wood in every project. They'd be prohibitively expensive. Many species are very difficult to find in quarter sawn, and not every project would look good with quarter sawn grain. But we can do some things to minimize the effects of wood movement, and that starts at the lumber yard. Try to avoid boards with end grain that dramatically changes. And if any part of the board looks like it was near the center of the tree, avoid that. If you have a wide plane sawn board, you may cut away the middle and use the two edge sections, which will be rift or quarter sawn and more stable. If you paid attention, you're probably asking where you can get quarter sawn lumber, since it has all that straight, stable grain. Unfortunately, you're not going to find it at a place like Home Depot unless you know where to look. As I said, I had him get extra wide boards, 2x10s or 12s. Then I took my marking pencil to the end grain. I'm marking off the parts of the board that grew closest to the center of the tree where the rings form tight circles. What remains are the portions with relatively straight rings, essentially quarter sawn or rift sawn wood. Yes, this will waste some wood, maybe as much as a third, but the result will be a much better, flatter, more stable tabletop. Here's what we ended up with. While a few knots do interrupt the flow of the grain across the surface, notice how the lines all run down the length of the boards. Not only is this wood of better quality, it's also better looking. I'll take straight grain over cathedral grain any day. We used some biscuits to keep the edges of the boards from slipping around while it was glued up, but otherwise, it's just glue and clamps. I'll link below to a video that has some tips for gluing up panels like this if you need them. This top remained in my shop for a couple months, and it stayed nice and flat the whole time because we took the time to carefully select the right materials for the job, even if those materials still came from the construction lumber racks at Home Depot. Of course, there's another way to ensure a flat tabletop: breadboard ends. These are also pretty attractive. If you'd like to see how we made those, leave a comment below and I'll consider making a follow-up video. Now check this out. 3M says their Cubitron 2 sandpaper is a revolutionary advancement in abrasive technology. What makes Cubitron paper different is the grit is made up of ceramic pyramids, which slice the fibers of the wood rather than plowing troughs through them like the grain of the tiny rocks that are found on other sandpaper. The result is an abrasive that works faster and stays cooler, so it lasts longer, significantly longer, like 5 or 6 times longer than the cheap stuff, and about twice as long as even other premium sandpapers. 3M Cubitron 2 destroyed Mirka, Klingspor, all the brands that are generally considered to be really good stuff. The Cubitron genuinely lasts a lot longer. I assume it must keep it cooler, perhaps it optimizes the way it cuts. I honestly don't understand how it works. It just works better than any other sandpaper I've used. All I can say is try it. Just one pack. You'll see what I mean. And if you do, please use the link below this video, which is to a small family business, and that business is well worth supporting.